That night, Chase dreamed of a quiet town. He found himself walking through the empty streets, blanking in a dense fog that obscured much of his vision. He tried to call out, but not a single soul answered him. Old cars laid abandoned in the streets, and empty stores and offices lined every building. Scraps of paper and leaves roamed free in the air, the distant sound of church bells ringing out an unknown distance away. Chase idly wandered the streets, turning his head around in an attempt to find anyone to make a sense of forgotten world he had been taken to. Hearing nothing but his own paw steps and gently humming wind in his fur, he began to wonder if he was truly alone. However, soon he arrived at a new structure that had emerged through the fog, the lookout. His ears stiffened in surprise as he looked up at the tower in confusion. The main entrance had several wooden boards nailed onto it, barring anyone from accessing the elevator. Feeling of a cold mist rise within him, Chase shakenly approached his home until he stood before the blocked entrance. Hesitantly peering through the boards, he caught a glimpse of a dog standing in the open in the elevator. It was a German shepherd. Judging by the tail and ears, it was hunched over, as if choking. Chase made an attempt to call it out, and the dog slowly stopped moving and peered back at Chase. The dog had a look of hopelessness, resignation, like it knew it had nothing left to live for. The dog began bleeding from the mouth, and Chase stepped back as the fog closed around him. Chase opened his eyes, awakening from his dream. He sat up sharply and still felt the cold feeling still lingering inside him. A few tears instantly left his eyes. He shrouded loneliness of a dream of leaving a scar on his mind. He shook his head, trying to push away the empty events that filled his head as he slowly broke into a quiet sob. The returning drive back to the lookout felt unreal, almost static, as Chase struggled to process the presence of a parasitic monster in Adventure Bay without trying to crash his rig. Watching the road was almost hypnotizing, alluring Chase to a bland state of numbness that seemed to block every sounds everything around him. At that moment, all he could hear was a distant white noise in his head, scratching groans that could only be identified as a broken guitar repeatedly churned in his ears, and an oddly soothing feeling washed over him. Upon returning home, he didn't acknowledge his friends or see if they were around, just went right to bed. Now awakened from his dream, Chase heard the falling rain tap against the roof of his kennel, quiet thunder echoing in the distance. Checking his wall clock, the shepherd realized that it was only 4 a.m. Lowering himself back into his bed, he tried to shut his eyes and fast forward through the night, but falling back to slumber, although his body refused to rest. Was it true what Cyrus had said? Chase pondered over what Cyrus had told him, his tail curling underneath him like in silent distress. A monster in Adventure Bay? A creature who had killed others without remorse? Never in his life he ever encountered such thing. He had watched the news plenty of times, leaning back in horror and disgust as he read about the atrocities going on in the world around him. But never once had something of the sort entered his own city. A monster who dragged innocent victims to merge itself. A cold and motionless figure who held no concept of mercy. And worst of all, a detail that left a dark stain on Chase's mind. The creature could hide the dormant of bodies in others. Surely that had been a lie, a cruel twisted joke from the captain to scare the small puppy. The police dog's eyes watered again as mellow wave sound entered his head, complete with flickering melody that resembled a grieving piano. He tried to force it out, but a foul image stabbed into his head. He saw his beloved friends, Marshall, Rocky, Zuma, and Rubble, and Sky and Everest, as their bodies leached and snarled into one another. The monster's bloody tendrils swooped them together as it slowly overpowered their minds, merging them into one horrible being. He violently shook his head, getting up and paced around in his kennel as his body began quivering. Someone in Adventure Bay was being used as a shell, containing the monster that silently hid within their body. Chase stopped, staring ahead at his wall, was a sombering psalm wept in his mind. If this person, this host, was not found and destroyed as soon as possible, Everything he knew and loved would be at risk. "I won't let this happen," Chase breathed out. Then he turned to exit out his kennel. He walked through the entrance and entered the rain, instantly soaking in his brown fur. The night had shrouded in the land around him, but he knew exactly where he was going. Walking through the rain, he traversed across the wet grass into the trees. He had no fear of the darkness around him, nor the protruding rain like Rocky. For a moment he barely noticed how wet he was getting, his mind overtaking his senses and seemingly blocking them out. Eventually he came to a large hatch in the ground with a rusted turning wheel sticking out. It was slightly flooding over them from the rain, but he knew it was built all those years ago, that it was well watertight, and all he had to do was turn the wheel a few times, and the steel hatch would slowly unlock, its secrets ready to be exposed. Chase sighed and placed his paws on it. "Chase?" a called voice from behind him. The police dog spun around in surprise, shocked in expression, the plaster on his face. He relaxed when he recognized a familiar chocolate lab. "What were you doing out here?" Zuma raised his eyebrow, tilting his head. "Why are you out there?" Chase countered, turning to face the lab. "Because I like walking in the rain. You know that," he replied, then looked out past Chase. "What's that on the ground?" The shepherd looked away, gentle shame resting over him. He wanted to lie and say it was nothing, but Zuma wasn't an idiot. He realized there was no hope in trying to play it off, so Chase reassigned and opened up to his friend. "Promise not to tell anyone?" Sure. What is it?" "It's a bunker," Chase explained. "Ryder had built it back when the Paw Patrol was just beginning." "Oh, cool," Zuma bounced, wagging his tail slightly. "What's in it?" "You sure you want to know?" "Well, yeah." The chocolate lab walked closer. "I'm curious, you know." Chase sighed and returned to the face and hatch. "Just remember, you promised not to tell anyone." He placed his paws on the wheel and rotated a few times to the left. Inner mechanisms could be heard underneath at work, slowly unlocking the door vault of the painful tools Chase fought for years to never touch. "Can you actually give me a paw with this?" he asked apologetically, coming to handle with a stretch across the front side of his teeth. Zuma nodded and walked over to the opposite side, clamping his teeth onto the other end of the handle. With a small count to 3, they grunted and pulled with all their might, slowly opening the large hatch. It made an unsettling noise as it opened, like creaking elderly man trying to open his jaw. Warm air began escaping from the bunker. The moonlight illuminated a narrow staircase as rain already began invading through the opening. Zuma peered down into the dark corridor. "Wow," he breathed in awe. Chase took a deep breath and began descending the staircase, motioning for the lab to follow him. The dogs were bathed over with the warm air as they traveled down, both jumping slightly as the hatch loudly closed from behind him. After a few moments, they reached the solid concrete ground, and Chase flickered the light switch with his nose. Lights suddenly shone brightly from the overhead lights, banishing the darkness from the corners of the bunker. Zuma could be heard gasping as the narrow corridor's contents were finally revealed. The bunker was simply a large hallway that stretched out in impressively length. The walls were lined with crates and wall hangers, all displaying various displays of weapons and tactical gear. Zuma's glee of discovering something new was quickly replaced with surprise, then bled into horror. "What is all this?" he asked fearfully, resting his eyes into a large riot shield that leaned against the wall, shining in the light. "The police diversion refers to this as riot gear," Chase explained. "I've had this stuff for years, just never needed to use any." The lab seemed frozen onto the floor, fearing that taking even a step could accidentally set off something explosive. Chase wondered what was already walking around, and looking at each item up and down, he passed by the shelves of idle tear gas grenades, forever waiting for their rigs to be pulled, sending the spewing irritant gas that could make anyone clear away. Zuma fearfully crept past a wall of tasers and batons, bulletproof vests hanging on hooks. "Chase," he began. "Why are we here?" The shepherd sighed and looked back at his friend. "I just needed to get something." He approached a small case sitting in the wall. It had shown polished silver, resting in its place as if it was hibernating. Carefully avoiding eye contact with Zuma, he gently undid the clasps and rested the case. His eyes laid to rest on the sight as he previously swore he'd never see again. A small handgun, the standard issue for police officers, a semi-automatic pistol meant to be holstered into one person, a tool for control and violence. Officers of the law were trained to be unafraid of drawing. The shepherd tried to prepare himself for the shudder that could course through his body, but it never came. He expected himself to be unsettled at the sight of the gun, but he was oddly unfeeling as its presence, like finding an item that you had lost some time ago. Ferox Miles, the parasite that could be stalking the bodies of Adventure Bay, but as they spoke, it had to be stopped. Chase would never sleep again if the city fell into ruin, and he could have done something about it. If it was true that the Ferox Miles was hiding somewhere in someone, then he would have had to do what had to be done. He had to find the host, whoever it may be, and kill them. It was his duty as a police dog to protect the people that he cared about, and he was damned sure if he didn't pull every stop hunt down the threat. Before Zuma could see the weapon, he quickly shut the case, making a mental note to return later with his pup pack. The pack had a secret compartment meant to hold a hoistler a gun. It was never a modification. His pup pack had always had it since day one, yet Chase resented using it, and the gun he was given forever hibernated in the artillery bunker hidden in the forest, until now. Zuma could be heard shuffling back in the hatch, eager to escape the corridor that contained the tools of violence and order. "We missed you out of the pup boogie contest," he said nervously, trying to steer into a more lighthearted conversation. Chase turned back to him, pushing the gun case back into place. "Sorry, I had an errand to run." "It's fine." Zuma slightly lowered his head. "We had to stop early because of Sky was coughing." It was those words that made Chase's ears shoot up in alarm, and he prayed that Zuma didn't notice. A freezing wave of dread rushed over him, stabbing to his head as his heart quickened. The shepherd seemed to draw back, attempting to hide his recoiled expression, but faint twitches from his face betrayed him. A horrible truth rose from the depths of that was all terrible, and seized Chase, and his heart sank. Cyrus never mentioned that if the monster had a preference for the bodies it hid in, meaning his own Paw Patrol was even more at risk than he had imagined. He slowly walked towards Zuma with a fearful expression, and the lab stepped back with unease. Hesitantly, Chase studied the other dogs up and down, flicking its eyes back at the corner of each lab, searching for the smallest hint of something amiss. "Chase?" asked the lab, slightly retracting in discomfort. "Why were you looking at me like that?" Narrowing his eyes, the shepherd slowly moved to the side, flexing his paws with faint movements. "Why were you outside in the pouring rain at 4 in the morning?" He pressed the question as he began approaching Zuma, sniffing around him. "I told you, I wanted to walk in the rain." The smaller lab stepped back, unease growing within him, and his flight response was mere moments away from sending him to a run. Chase raised an eyebrow, then sighed as he relaxed. "Sorry, I'm just on edge." "Why though?" Flicking his eyes back to the gun case, the shepherd shook his head, pushing away the gentle chimes that rung in his head. "Just bad dreams." As the night went on, they climbed and left the bunker, and shut the hatch behind them. Chase made the lab swear up and down that he wouldn't disclose this location to anyone, warning him that it was federal property. As they returned to their respective dens, Zuma shrugged off as the tense night and went to bed. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when the clock struck 6 in the morning, an orange hue bleeding into the sky. No one noticed Chase slipped back away into his forest, this time wearing his pup pack. He returned to the bunker and retrieved his handgun, holstering it into the hidden compartment of his pup pack. Chase's mind was screaming, his unease flooding him over with himself disconnecting from the world around him. Who could he trust? Could anyone be trusted if they were all possible hosts for the parasite? Grimacing as he left the bunker again, now secretly armed, he returned to the lookout and gave a sweeping look at all of his friends' kennels. Their homes were made in the circle of a lookout, the ring of dens each pup would find solace in. Chase grimaced and returned to his own kennel as the sun began rising in the further horizon. Yet the world around him seemed to appear in dense gray. The static in his mind was noticeably becoming louder.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Ms. Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.